Welcome back to the Dungeon Master Academy series, Mastering the Realms. I'm Dungeon Master Jeff, and here on the DMA, I find awesome adventures for you to run at your own gaming table at home. Each series is split up into 2 parts. In part 1, I sit down with the adventure's writer and find out straight from the creator how it was meant to be run, and any pitfalls you might run into along the way. We cover all 3 pillars of play, combat, role-playing, and exploration, and chat about everything D&D along the way. Then in part 2, we run the adventure with a rambunctious group of D&D adventurers. What could possibly go wrong? This week's featured adventure is called The Little Wish. It's written and illustrated by Douglas Bushong. It's a Dungeons & Dragons Adventure League title, Tier 1, Level 2, and you can find it on the DM's Guild. I also have with me Dungeon Master Angelo and Dungeon Master Jeremy. Dungeon Master Angelo is going to be running the live gameplay sessions in part 2. And one final note, Douglas was an amazing guest. He has a ridiculous amount of D&D knowledge and lore. Did you know where cantrips came from? I didn't. Hey Douglas, why don't you give us a little character backstory about yourself?
Sure. I'm Douglas Bushong, and I played Dungeons & Dragons first and second edition back in high school, back in the 90s and early 2000s, and I joined the Navy in the late 90s and took a bit of a hiatus from D&D, and I've worked in power generation, and I'm currently an instructional designer, so I develop corporate training, some of you may have taken, and I started back with playing 5th edition D&D. I think it was around 2019. It was shortly before the pandemic, and my segue back into 5th edition was through Adventurers League, and so it was I like the idea of being able to take a character and drop in and drop out of sessions and having the character be portable from session to session. And the thing that got me into writing for D&D was the Dungeon Craft program. One of the things I liked about it was it allowed you to break the rules to some degree, because rules as written means rules as written, and so what is written in the module is the rules as written. And so while Dungeon Craft provides some constraints, you can only use the spells as they're written, the magic items as they're written, the stat blocks for monsters as they're written. Beyond that, you have an enormous amount of flexibility. And if you want to make a room that when you pull a lever, gravity turns sideways, you can do that. And if you look at some adventures like White Plume Mountain and Blue Alley, they do things like that. So you have, like in White Plume Mountain, you have a perfectly frictionless floor. There's no rules for that. They made the rules for that in White Plume Mountain. And so I like being able to take that openness and then pour it into my adventures.
Yeah. Speaking of openness, so I've obviously read The Little Wish, the module. Amazing. Lots of fun, and we'll get into it in a little bit. But what comes in your adventure package, and where can I find it?
Sure. You can find it only at dmsguild.com, and it includes the adventure itself, which I have black and white artwork interlaced in the adventure. I really shoot for that old school aesthetic, and you can also get it. It comes with a zip file that contains color artwork. So my process for creating the artwork is I do it in CG, and then I have an inker who does the inking for me. So for the black and white portions, and then it also includes black and white and color maps.
Amazing. Artist, I love that, because I'm personally an absolutely awful artist, and I'm really terrible at it. So kudos for being an artist, and the artwork in this module that we'll show as we're kind of going is absolutely amazing. There's been a lot of talk about AI being used in art. Obviously, you being an artist, I'm very curious to see or hear your impression of AI right now, where it stands. Obviously, you probably haven't used any of it, but got any personal kind of like feelings towards AI, either as a writer or as an artist?
Yeah, I do. I have a dislike for using AI to produce the artwork, where you give the prompt and it spits out the artwork. And likewise, I have a dislike for using it for having it do the creative endeavor for you with the writing. Of course, broadly, I'm a big supporter of AI when it's used for development of new technologies, curing cancer, making more efficient vehicles. It's wonderful for that. And I actually, even in an artistic endeavor, I'm okay with AI being used as a sounding board, or using it for ideation, arguing with the AI, saying, here, I have these 10 parameters, right? And I want to have them arranged into a paragraph, or you want to just take something that you've written that's very, very long, and see how the AI sorts it, take that, rip it apart, pull it back together again, and just use it literally as a sounding board. You have uh, I know there are introverted people out there who may have a hard time coming together and forming a team with somebody and bouncing ideas off of each other. And I think there's value in the bouncing of the ideas. I don't think there's value, or I don't think we should take the ideas that come from the AI, which clearly came from whatever the AI was trained on, and using that as our own. Yeah,
Um,
I have a lot of art books that I reference, and so I'll pull an art book off the shelf and I'll look through it, and very often when I'm thinking about an idea for something for a module, a piece of art may be an inspiration for the idea for something I'm going to write, or the reverse. There may be I may have an idea for a puzzle, and that's the inspiration for the artwork. So there's a back and forth there, and so
okay.
clearly, if I'm perusing an art book, I'm looking literally at past artist work. But sometimes what I'm looking for is what's the color scheme that they used, what's the angle that they used. And that's one of the beauties of doing things in CG is I can set up my scene, set up my models, I can move the camera around.
Yeah.
If I want to move in close and take a like a fisheye lens on it, I can do that. I often say i I do photography, but I just don't have to feed my models and they hold still. I don't know how much they feed the other models, but for my models they're great because they're all within the CG software.
That's amazing. So you kind of briefly touched on there that you use art to sometimes inspire you for a module
Oh
or
yeah.
something along those lines. Was there a particular piece of art or what influenced your writing for The Little Wish?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that influenced the writing. So stylistically, I had some inspiration from the Smurfs. There was a holiday special of the Smurfs. In fact, after you play it, I would encourage go watch the holiday special. There's one specific scene you'll know it after you've played it. That it's like, oh yeah, that happened to Gargamel. And there were some modules back in the 2E days. One particular one was called the Created. It was a Ravenloft module that had the players would be they would go into the bodies of puppets, and then they had to play as puppets in this Ravenloft world. And so I like the idea, and there are a few in fifth edition that are like that as well. I like the idea of the PCs going into the stat block of something else.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit uncomfortable, and they've got to figure out how to solve the problem of being in that stat block. I also back in second edition, I was a huge fan of the Al Qadim setting, and particularly the Shire, which is I know I'm going inside baseball on this one, but
Way back.
yeah, Shires had they were a type of wizard who they couldn't cast their spells right away. They had a little genie that they would send off. They would say, "Go get me this spell," and the genie would go off and get it for them 2d4 or 1d4 turns later, which is horrible in combat. But what you learn to do there is you learn to leverage those spells that have long durations, right? And one of those spells was a spell called Cantrip. And in second edition, it was a first level spell. And when you cast Cantrip, it would last for a half hour per character level. And you could make up any cantrip you wanted. And so it just you could just make it up. So I want to light my pipe. I want to, cause a gust of wind. I want to create a smell. And those cantrips, they broke that first level spell out into all the cantrips that we have in fifth edition today. But the premise, the cantrip though was one of only two spells at the time that could do anything you wanted: wish and cantrip. Wish was ninth level, cantrip was first level, and there was an article that had that very premise in. It was in Dragon Magazine issue 221. It's one of my favorite issues of Dragon Magazine. It has a beautiful Larry Elmore cover. I would encourage showing the picture on this one
Oh yeah.
as it goes across the screen. But there was an article called "The Little Wish," which basically took that premise that cantrip is a little wish. It's a spell that lets you do whatever you want, and so and it gave you the beauty of it was it gave you a series it gave you pages of ideas that of little things that you could do with the spell cantrip. It broke it down by school, so it had necromancy, it had at that time they didn't call it transmutation, they called it alteration, but it was alteration, evocation. And so you had a whole variety. They had like you could animate little mice as skeletons, right? They couldn't do anything, couldn't do any damage, but you could animate and make them dance or whatever. And so it gave a lot of ideas there. And so then my thought was, I like playing the cantrips in fifth edition that allow you to take multiple abilities that none of them do damage. But if you, the obvious three are Prestidigitation, Thaumaturgy, and Druidcraft. But then when you look in Xanathars, they have the four elemental ones, Shape Water, Mold Earth. Each of those have multiple abilities. Again, they don't do damage, but they let you do a lot of little things. So um, I actually have a character named Cantrip that I play from time to time. He's perpetually at fourth level, but he's a cleric, druid, sorcerer, warlock, and he has like 15 cantrips. And when you if you were to take each bullet point of those cantrips, that's like 40 abilities. And so with all of those, he's a Swiss Army knife of little things, but those little things can add up. So I find that to be interesting. So my goal here, and we can talk about the design later on, but the goal here was to make a module really about cantrips and about increasing the flexibility and the knowledge that people can get from cantrips. And I wanted to challenge new players and older players. So new players, when they get Mold Earth for the first time, they might see, oh wow, this is what this spell does. Older players who think they know what all of these cantrips do can go in, and very often people will say, I thought I knew this cantrip. I didn't realize I could do that with it, right? And that's a joy for me when I get that.
This is super crafty. I love everything about this, and obviously I read the adventure, like I've said, and I know a bunch about it. But why don't you tell the audience what the adventure is about now that we've kind of like sporadically gone around like the edges of it? Let's dive into the middle.
Sure. So the adventure is it's the second in a series. The DOBU is just first two letters, my first and last name.
Okay.
There's a wizard who's the big bad evil guy. He's building an army of the undead, and he has unusual ways of doing it. One of the ways is he builds dungeon crawls and spreads the word about the dungeon crawls to get adventurers to go there and die, so that he has good, high quality skeletons that he can use for his army of the undead. That's the deep background, and that's the direction I'm going with the Spelljammer module next. The curation of those skeletons is happening in space.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, but for this adventure, there's a pocket of the old weave, which was before the time of troubles, where this pocket of the old weave exists in this domain, and so it has the old magic, the old cantrip magic, and the I got to remember the word for it. The archfey of the domain is Mother Nature, and she uses her followers, the Chwinga, in her domain, to give the powers of the cantrips to other people to help care for the domain. And so this place, the necromancer found this place. He came here, and he wants to control. He wants to get control of this part of remnant of the old magic, and so he realized that Mother Nature's sleep cycle is based upon the weather pattern or the season in the domain. So he's created a perpetual winter, and she's asleep. She's been asleep for 2 years now because of the perpetual winter. And so the party is tasked with going to the wizard's castle and breaking the winter.
Hi, Douglas. I'm Angelo Corsino, as Jeff introduced earlier, and I'm actually going to be running your adventure in the next part. And I always like to, tell people I'm a bit of a combat specialist as a DM. I get through combat really quickly. I make them very interesting, that sort of thing. And this module is bold because it has effectively zero combat. How did you decide to kind of get that in and have those kind of exploration encounters disguised as combat encounters and make them all dynamic and interesting? What was your thought process for that?
So part of it was I knew that I was working backwards from the end on this one, and I knew that I wanted to, because I wanted cantrips to be the tool that the players would use to solve the puzzles. And I want to clarify there that the characters would use to solve the puzzles, not the players. One of the things I stress in these adventures, it's important to me that if I'm doing a puzzle-based adventure, it's not based on player knowledge; it's based on character knowledge.
That was exactly one thing that when I got the Cole's notes that it was heavily puzzle-based. When I went and I was like, oh no! But then when I read them, I was like, oh my goodness, this person does puzzles the way I actually enjoy them.
Yeah. So a huge hero of mine is Ron Gilbert, right? Yeah. And he made Secret of Monkey Island, Maniac Mansion, and so I learned there's an article on his webpage about puzzle dependency charts, and it's actually that's the structure of how you design those types of point and click adventures. And so I knew that I was starting from the end and working my way backwards into this is the final door. There's a key that I have to get to the final door. That key I break up into multiple pieces and I put those behind doors, and then those doors are locked and I have to find keys for those. So I'm working my way backwards to the beginning. And what I found was in my previous adventure, I did a similar thing, but there was a little bit of combat in there. In this instance, because of the constraints that I wanted to put on players to only have access to the campestry abilities, the magic items they find, and any cantrips that they find that they get in the adventure, I had to. I effectively had to remove most combat from it. But the goal, I tried to put in a few things that would you can still create an exciting moment.
Yeah.
So there's a moment with the cat, for example, where it's a pseudo combat, but
it's tense because that cat is dangerous to these
yeah, very, very
creatures.
dangerous. Yeah. But the party has the tools necessary to defeat the cat. Likewise, at the beginning and at the end of the adventure, I want to get people from one place to another quickly. I like using skill challenges. I like to think of them as like quick time events in God of War,
Exactly.
right?
That's how I look at them as well.
Yeah, so you can, and one of the things I like about skill challenges, I have a method of skill challenges that's a little bit different than most, and that is, I'll do a skill challenge and I'll say, here are the criteria. This is the skill you need to use. However, if you use something that is limited, that you don't, that like if you use a spell slot, if you use an action surge, if monks use key points, if you do something that's limited in a way that makes sense for the skill challenge, you automatically succeed.
Yeah,
Now,
when I was reading that, I liked that. I like that as like a kind of like way to reward the party for spending their limited resources.
yeah. And what I find with that is occasionally I'll have DMs that will complain about that. And it's like, well, you're making the skill challenge too easy. It's like, no, I'm making the encounter suck resources out of the players willingly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, you get a lot of battles where it's like, oh, we had a battle. It was 40 minutes, and they didn't spend a single spell slot because they were, using cantrips, right?
Yeah, fire bolts and sacred flames and just their attacks.
Yeah, but if I can get them to willingly give up a first or second level spell slot to expend charges of magic items, and I can do it in 5 minutes, it's wonderful, right?
Perfect.
So the excitement comes from those other events rather than the combat itself.
Right. So let's move on towards like the little bit more of like the kind of like role play aspects and the kind of NPCs and such that are in this module. I adored Leaf. Leaf was like that nice little kind of like push along, adorable little druid that just kind of gets the party kind of like to buy in early.
Yeah. And Leaf is one who, Leaf comes with you on the adventure subtly. But Leaf is a mechanism for the DM. If you really find the players are stuck, the DM can sneak a little information using Leaf if they need to. Generally, you won't have to. The puzzle, as long as you encourage exploration, and we'll get to that pillar in a minute. As long as you encourage, keep looking around, you should be fine. But yeah, Leaf obviously is going to be the person giving the adventure. But that green-haired druid it's a character that I've had kicking around for a long time, and you'll see her again in future adventures. But I like that there's a spunkiness to her, and then she introduces you, of course, to the caretaker of Mother Nature, and Greg Mala, who is the apprentice to the wizard. And with each of those, with the apprentice, I was looking for, obviously, the wizard would be incredibly dangerous. A high-level necromancer is incredibly dangerous for this group. So it's like, I want there to be some challenges, and I want there to be things that they have to explore, like the eye color and shape, the voice that the campestry can mimic. How can I have the wizard not be there and have them not get any interaction with the wizard, and still have them able to function in the wizard's castle? And that's where an apprentice was a helpful mechanism for that. And then the apprentice, of course, had the cat, which I don't, this is going back to the Smurfs reference. I don't know if you caught that Greg Mala is Gargamel.
I did not.
Okay.
But yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
All right. So the kind of like we talked about a little bit about puzzles, and the puzzles in this are done in a way that I actually enjoy. Like generally, if a puzzle takes me out of character in a game, I tend to kind of take a back seat and let the other party members do stuff, because I don't know, it keeps me kind of out of character if I'm doing a puzzle out of character. But I love how yours are all in character. Can you tell me a little bit about how you designed such intricate puzzles and kept them all in character? Because there's a lot of them in this module.
Yeah, I usually have about 12 to 15 puzzles for a 4-hour adventure, but they're small puzzles, and they're puzzles where the solution to the puzzle is somewhere in the adventure, right? So you're not relying, I really don't like puzzle or like riddles that have like the solution to the riddle is the schools of magic or the gods of forgotten realms, because
it's tired.
Yeah, it's hard for new character or new players, right? But I like saying, okay, what are the resources that the characters are going to get in the adventure? And sometimes I have to make those resources up. So there might be a series of keys, a diamond, a sapphire, and an emerald key that will go to a diamond, sapphire, and emerald lock. And so I will often train the party at the beginning of an adventure by giving them a puzzle that is easy. They find, a diamond key, and they go into a room, and then they put it in a diamond lock. And then later they find an emerald lock, but they don't have an emerald key. But now they're trained. They know, oh, this is what I'm looking for. So they start, all right, we need to keep looking around to find the solution.
And so have you ever had it where like they kind of get that diamond at the key at the beginning and they're like, no, this is too easy. There's got to be something else. Like, do you ever see that?
That happens sometimes. The thing that I get more often that is very satisfying for me is when they think they've cheated me, or they think they've cheated the DM, and they come up with a solution, and that solution is one of the 4 or 5 solutions that I've put in there as this is a viable solution, right? But you don't have to let them know that. Yep, that works, right?
Oh, of course.
So, but I really like starting with those resources. So like, what magic items are you going to get? Is there a way that I can take that magic item and I can leverage it as a key to the puzzles, right? So, an example I like to use, I haven't put into a module yet, but I think it's a good example. Let's say I've got a constraint where one of the magic items, or let's say I have a puzzle that gives you a riddle that says something like, when the elf is bathed in the moonlight, something like that. At some point in the adventure, they come across a door and it has an elf on it. Now, I could have that adventure be set in a place where it's nighttime outside, but the moonlight is bright. And maybe in another part of the adventure, they find several shined, polished silver plates. And somebody might figure out we could take these plates and bend the moonlight over to the door, right? Just like in Legend, right? But I would also have someplace else in the adventure where they find a moon touch sword, and they can take the moon touch sword and use the light of that. That'll solve it too, right? And then in the description, I would say something along the lines of, if they use a moonbeam spell, that'll solve it too, right? If they, so there are multiple options. And then I always give the caveat of, if the party comes up or the players come up with an option that's not listed here, but that makes sense, allow them to succeed. That way it kind of future-proofs it. So if they bring a new splat book out with new spells and such, that they're not stuck in a stupid place because the answer wasn't there. So it gives a little bit of play in the joints for the DM.
And okay, so speaking of kind of like toys and things that you put in the module to kind of like have the party get through, I've seen in a lot of instances previously where people are reluctant to play modules where the toys on their character sheet are taken away and replaced by an NPC stat block. What tips and tricks do you have to suggest to help kind of get these players to buy into this sort of mechanic? Because in Adventures League, I've seen multiple instances where people are like, "Oh no," and they kind of get upset when they don't get to play their character.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in fact, the short answer to that is do it at low level. And so this module was actually originally going to be a tier 2 module.
Okay.
And part of that was because I had a puzzle idea where one of the constraints was going to be, one of the magic items was going to be a waterborne set of armor, which if it has the waterborne property, it floats, right? So what I wanted the party the Campestri to do when they got to the end was they would take the armor, throw it into the river, and ride it down river, right? And
I love that.
Right. Now, the problem I had was there wasn't an armor set in tier one in among the magic items we were allowed to do. So I had to figure out a way to make it work. But as I talked to people, I blatantly asked the question. I said, how would you feel about a tier two module that took you out of your character sheet? And they said, we're okay with it at tier one, but not at tier two. And
Okay.
so, yeah, and now at the end of the adventure, they take a balloon ride instead, but it's a similar premise.
Mhm.
It's a sequence. It's a set of skill challenges. They're just not riding the armor down.
Yeah, it's a much similar kind of thing where they've used the things that they've found along the way and have a little bit of help to get the thing going, and it's a very good end sequence.
Yeah, and actually, a call out I would make is on the sign up. I did see the sign up for the session you're going to run. I think I saw that somebody had commented that they were, it's too bad this is level two because
That
if it
that,
was
that was
level
me.
three, oh, it was you. Okay, okay. Somebody had commented that was if it was level three, I'd be able to get this subclass, and it's like, well, if you play this, you will get to level three, and you're not missing as much. Yeah.
I just didn't want to spoil things when I was telling them the signups. So, um, as well as kind of like keeping on the tune of players and that sort of thing, players are creative. That's
Yeah.
kind of one of the beauties of why we enjoy this game so much. What is the most creative solution that you've seen to one of your puzzles in this module that kind of made you go, "Oh wow, I didn't think of that. That's good."
So I wouldn't say that there was a huge one, but there were a lot of small ones. And so, but the thing that I find with this type of module is, I'll usually come up with two or three solutions, and then I give the caveat of if they come up with something else, let them succeed. During my play testing, almost invariably across multiple puzzles in the adventure, they will come up with something else, and that something else will make sense.
Mhm.
And so I'll allow them to succeed, and I'll make a note. And then when I go back and I'm writing version 0.02 of the adventure, I include the solution that they came up with as one of the options. And that's why when you get in there, you actually see multiple options.
Thank
So
you.
I would say in terms of a big one, there isn't a big one, but there are a lot of small ones. A lot of the solutions that you see in the adventure itself for the 12 to 15 puzzles that are there, those come from the players.
Nice.
All right, that's smart to also write those in because
Yeah.
if they're good, they're good.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you have any other tips that you could share with us?
Sure. The other tip that I'll have is don't be afraid of redundancy. So it's okay to, like, if you have a key in a puzzle, when they find the key, say what puzzle it goes to or what lock it goes to. And when you get to the lock, say what keys can solve that lock. If you do it at both ends, you'll get a little bit more in the module, but it makes it easy for the DM who wants to then try to run the module. So don't fear. I in almost every instance, I have duplications of content at the key and at the lock.
Hi, Douglas. I'm Jeremy,
Mhm.
and I wanted to ask you some questions just about, the writing process itself, as well as playtesting and having other dungeon masters run this adventure. So I noticed in reading that there's certain parts where you put in some DM notes where, you want to kind of keep the players focused on a certain area, otherwise the adventure might end. And I'm curious, what tips you might have for dungeon masters running the adventures to kind of keep people on track without, running into those roadblocks.
Yeah, a big part of it is when there's gravity to the situation, express the gravity to the situation. And I'm okay, every once in a while you're going to get players who want to sabotage something. If they sabotage it, they sabotage it. But I think so. In this adventure, there are two critical points where they have to, like, one is at the circle with the troop of mushrooms, and then later on, it's very shortly after that. It's do not go straight to the castle, and the leaf is there to protect them, to keep them from dying. But I think if they realize that they're at the potentially at the mercy of a high level necromancer at level two, um, maybe we ought to follow the instructions here. And then there's a little bit of there are things that I do. It's like if I know I want them to get to the next place, what can I do to prevent them from wanting to stay in this place, right? So that was one of the things that led into the first skill challenge that I give, where they get from the circle to Mother Nature's hovel. that skill challenge has multiple instances of delivering exhaustion to the players now, or to the characters. And they're not going to get to 6, they're not going to die, but there's a fair chance that several of them are going to be exhausted. So when the time comes that they have to eat the mushrooms, and they hear this is going to remove your exhaustion from you. Okay, I'm behind that, right? And if there's a hesitancy to eat the mushrooms, that's part of what Leaf does. Leaf picks one up and eats it right away, right? So it's instilling trust, and it's encouraging them. Like, we have a thing, you want to give them something to run to and something to run from, right? So that's the approach that I generally take. But if you're going to have somebody that's intent on ruining the adventure and say, I'm going to go kick over all the mushrooms. All right, Leaf sends you home. Go do another adventure. Right.
Yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen too much in Adventures League.
Yeah, it doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, and you were mentioning earlier that, Adventures League kind of got you back into the swing of things. But I wonder if you've included, either this adventure or an adventure like it in a campaign that you've run, because it looks like this is something cool that you could put into like any campaign, to drive your players to, this kind of adventure, this kind of encounter.
Yeah, I have actually. So in my favorite hardcover so far of all the hardcovers they've published has been Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Now, I've played through several hardcovers, and I DM'd Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and the thing that I enjoyed the most about that one was it had more callbacks than any other hardcover I've ever read. So we ran it over the course of about a year and 3 or 4 months, every other week. And on the last session, over a year after we started playing, we had things that occurred that a decision they made on the first session affected it, right? All through the adventure, it was like that. Well, there's a point where you go from one section of Prismeer to another, and I had the party when they were leaving that section and arriving at the next one, they met Leaf in that next section in Thither, and she approached them and asked them for help, and took them to a little side subdomain of Mother Nature's domain. But I found it was thematically appropriate there, but it solved a problem for me, because Wild Beyond the Witchlight doesn't give you a lot of gold. It gives a lot of trinkets and such, which is the currency there. But trinkets can't be used by the wizard in your party to buy spell scrolls to populate their book. So I needed a way of, working within the Adventurers League constraints to get them the gold that they needed to be able to play their character the way they would want to play their character. So this gave me a little bit of that. And I've done that with other adventures too, where I just peppered them in throughout. But yeah, this one lends itself well. You can put it pretty much anywhere. If you don't have any place to put it and you're just doing a standard one shot, I say put them in Madame Fiona's tea kettle in Flan, which is that has kind of a special place for me, because the very first adventure I ever played in 5th edition was Defiance in Flan, which everything happens in Madame Fiona's tea kettle. Yep.
So I'm a big fan of, when I start a game with players as a DM, having them off to the races right away with like multiple options of things to do. How would you suggest starting this, just as a one-off of getting them right engaged and involved right away, not meeting at a tavern per se?
Right. So if you can have them meet with Leaf anywhere. They could be. You could have the party. They were traveling together. They met outside of town just before they went in. Leaf walked upon them with. You want to put it in a warm area so that when Leaf walks in with snow in her hair and snow on her clothes, they're like, "Wait, what is this?" It's like something is weird. Where's the snow coming from, right? So you can decide where you want them to be. I appreciate the point about not in a tavern, but you need some kind of place to aggregate to make the party congregate, right? Yeah. Wherever you want to do that is up to you. You could have, if you wanted, a town jobs board, and they pull a card and Leaf says, "Meet me outside of town," right? You could. There are a lot of ways that you could go about it, but the critical thing is you want to get the party together. Leaf is going to offer them money, and Leaf calls out, "Hey, my understanding is people in this world like gold, and gold. There's a kind of an implication there that gold doesn't have much value where Leaf comes from, but hey, it seems to have value for you, so I'll give you some of it if you come help me, right?" And so once you get them in there, and once you get them to do the mushroom ritual, the in my first iteration of this module, I actually had them walk through a series of steps from the mushroom ritual to Mother Nature's hovel, and it took about 45 minutes. And I found my players gave me feedback that it felt like a bit of an information dump that was unnecessary.
Okay.
And so they felt like that they were walking and but not necessarily exploring, not necessarily they were having a conversation, but they weren't role playing necessarily, and there was no combat. So it's like, did you really need to waste that 45 minutes? That was why I replaced that with a skill challenge to tighten it up a bit. But so once you get them to the ritual, they perform the ritual, have each player say the phrase. It's hard to pour so much kindness onto others without spilling a little on yourself. Have them say the phrase, and then get them right into the skill challenge. They have to meet. Let's see. They have to meet the Chwinga. She tells the Chwinga to go back to the party, and then you get them right into the skill challenge. So it's relatively quick. You should be able to get them to the castle in probably 30 minutes. So for a 4-hour adventure, they get about 2.5 to 3 hours in the castle. 30-minute bookend on the front end, 30 minutes on the back end.
Yeah, I like advancing things and giving players to do. So I like the spin that you've put on it, where it's especially like, say it's in the summertime or a hot, humid, kind of dry, when all of a sudden leaf comes in with snow all over it. It's like, what is that? Completely different. Love that.
Put it in Chult if you want.
Yeah, right. Or like a 9 parts of hell. It's like a nice little side adventure in DIA. It would be absolutely hilarious. What would be next on your writing front? Within the lore that you've mentioned that you have a Spelljammer kind of coming out soon.
Yep.
Is this more kind of like heavy lore or puzzles, or where's your next adventure and what's next on the writing front?
So most of my adventures are going to be puzzle based. I feel like that's a niche that's poorly filled right now, and a lot of the puzzle based adventures that are out there are really, they're very linear. They're riddle based, not necessarily puzzle based, right? So I try to break away from the linearity and make the breakout more. Ron Gilbert calls it bushy. Okay. The tree, make it more bushy, right? But the next place I'm going is going to be Spelljammer, and there's still going to be puzzle elements to it. So there's going to be discovery, like what's happening. They're at this place where it appears that bodies are coming in here. Something is happening to them. They're being turned into these kind of uber skeletons. But why? What's going on? So there's going to be exploration of that, and they're going to be, and then again, the necromancer is not necessarily going to be there, but this is another step in the schemings of what he has going on, and they're going to start to see the bigger picture. So what may have started with my first module, Beneath the Stony Stump, as a dungeon crawl, goes into the Little Wish as we're going into this side domain. But those are all contributing to a larger goal, and that one is going to be a contribution to a larger goal as well. So I'm working my way through. I'm doing about one adventure per season that they give us. So the next one after Spelljammer will likely be in Planescape. And now what that in Planescape means, I'm not 100% sure, so I have to look at the parameters that they give me and then figure that out along the way.
Yeah, I don't think anyone knows what Planescape or what they're going to allow us to do, basically, at this point is very up in the air. Don't have a lot of experience doing puzzle-based games and running puzzle-based games. I can't imagine trying to write one either. Do you have any ideas, or can you describe your writing style and how you came up with puzzle-based games and how better to run them or better to write them, I guess?
Yeah, so in terms of writing them, the big things I would call out are, you want to set up your puzzle dependency. So you want to make sure you never put yourself in a place where the players are locked behind a puzzle.
Hey, Douglas, can you describe or explain what puzzle dependency is?
Yeah, sure. So I'll send you a diagram of what one looks like. Actually, I'll specifically send you a diagram of the puzzle dependency chart for Blue Alley. So I took the module Blue Alley and I actually mapped out, if you wanted to do everything in Blue Alley, what would you have to do? What are all the places you have to go, and what are the things you have to do in those places? I started at the end and said, okay, I've solved it. I have everything. And I worked backwards. What did I do to get this? What did I do to get this? And those things that I got were the final keys to the final lock, right? but each of those keys were behind other locked doors. So it's almost like a flow chart.
I was going to say flow chart or like critical path.
Yeah, there is a critical path, but one thing about it though is the critical path actually it is branching out. So a critical path, you typically think about it in terms of the time for each step. You don't necessarily care about the time, but you do care about the flow chart. But with a puzzle dependency, like flow charts typically tend to focus on tasks. What the puzzle dependency looks at is keys, locks, and guideposts. So the lock is the thing you're trying to get through. The key is the thing that lets you get through it. And then the guideposts are the things that give you hints, like that they go together. So in using that diamond key example I gave earlier, the first time you connect a diamond key with a diamond lock, the guidepost I've given you is that the color of the key corresponds to the color of the lock. I've trained you on that now. And so now as you go along, later you get an emerald block, I need to look for an emerald key. You get an amethyst key, I need to look for an amethyst lock, right? So just with one little act, I've trained you on that. So now, how many more things can I train you on with that? And you can have a puzzle that is where the key isn't a physical key. So for example, let's say there's a character you need to interact with, and the character has a piece of information that you need, but they don't want to give it to you, but they're really hungry. The key, the character is the lock. Yeah. The key that you want to get that's behind that lock is the information they have. The key that might open that lock might be a sandwich. So you can build it out to say, okay, here are the things that you have to accomplish. You have to figure out how you accomplish that. Now for that character that has that information, you may give a combat or a role play or an exploration lock or key that unlocks that character. So the exploration might be go find something they want. Combat might be kill them and take it from them. Role play might be talk them out of it, right? So you can use non-exploration based approaches to it. I just tend to lean into the exploration because it's so underserved. So for me, and that's I think that's an important thing. For the pillars of play, I look at the pillars of play as a pillar of play is how you solve the problem in front of you. Combat is a pillar of play. You engage in combat, you kill the thing, that solved the problem in front of you. Role play is a pillar of play. You role play and talk them through it, that solves the problem. Exploration is a pillar of play. If you have a problem, you don't know what to do, and the solution to the problem is keep exploring, right? So if you keep exploring, you will find the solution to the problem. So that's not necessarily the way Wizards describes that pillar, but it's the way I find it useful to think of it is if I have a problem, I can't solve it, and if I keep exploring, that solves it. That's an exploration pillar of play.
Amazing. I like it. It's just another way of thinking about it that's really kind of opened my mind to dealing with puzzles in general. Because typically, like you said, most of the puzzles we deal with or we see written are riddles. Like you're waiting for one answer or one word of an answer. Where this is a completely different spin on puzzles, which I'm very interested in seeing Angelo run this at the same time. You mentioned Ron Gilbert as one of your inspirations. Who else has helped you along the way for writing these adventures that you have so far?
Yeah, so way back in the day, I first heard the term point and click adventure it was at Gen Con. Will Wheaton was speaking, and there was a comment made about people know I like point and click adventures, and I just made a note, point and click adventure, look it up. So when I looked it up, it's like, oh, things like Maniac Mansion and Secret of Monkey Island. It's like, oh, I played all of these. That's what that genre was called. So it solved a problem for me, but it helped me to understand that genre that I loved has a name, right? So
okay, for anybody that doesn't know, do you want to describe what a point and click adventure is?
Sure. So it's literally you have a character on the screen, you point and click on the thing you want them to interact with, and you can highlight the things that you can potentially interact with. Now, if you go way back in the history, like the early King's Quest games or the early Zort games, you would actually type in the commands. But a problem that you had in those games is you didn't know what all of the commands were. So there was this, and I'm stealing this phrase from Ron Gilbert because he talks about this in his article, but he says there's a sub meta game that you would play that was, he called it second guessing the parser. So you had to try to figure out, like, you want to pick up this thing and you want to use this thing with this, and it'll say you can't do that. But you know that you could do that if the game wasn't telling you couldn't do that, but there's a specific word that the game is looking for. So what Ron Gilbert did with Maniac Mansion was he made the Scum engine, which was an engine specifically. The two M's in Scum is Maniac Mansion, but he made it so that all of your commands are at the bottom of the screen. So instead of typing them in, you build your sentences with the commands that are there, which means you know all of the possible commands you could use, right? So point and click adventures lean into that, and the modern ones will have you can play them with a controller where you push a button and a command wheel will come up, and you select one of the command trees and you pick the sub options from there. But yeah, so Will Wheaton, Ron Gilbert, Tim Schafer, the maker of Brutal Legend, and I think it was Tim Schafer's studio that also made the Broken Age and the Cave, which are they're similar to point and click adventures. We can play them on consoles. Broken Age is a proper point and click adventure. And then my wife was a big inspiration. She she has a pretty good eye for error, and so when anything I write,
correcting you personally, okay, we're not just talking about writing anymore.
Oh, well, broadly, yes, but yeah, anything that I write, I will run by her, and she'll go through, give it a look, and sometimes it'll be just, this is weirded awkwardly, or I don't run into too many instances where it's just wrong, because usually, I lean into proofreaders. If I have the red squiggly lines or the blue ones, I'll look at what it says and see if I can reword it. But sometimes it'll be something that's technically correct. It's just awkward. And very often I find the simplest answer there is it's a long sentence. Break it into two sentences, problem solved. But yeah, she's a big help with that.
Shout out to Douglas's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And that will pretty well wrap up our Q&A portion. Next up, folks, we'll have the live gameplay with Angelo as the DM. Thank you, Dungeon Master Jared, for your insight. Subscribe, reach out in the comments if you want to be a player, a DM, a guest writer, have any suggestions on writers you'd like to see featured, want to submit some player character art, or just say hi like my mom does. Hey, Mom. Thanks for joining us at the Dungeon Master Academy, Mastering the Realm. Peace.
Thank you.